He could order the destruction of an entire city with a nod, but in front of a bookseller, he didn't know what to say. Vincent Moretti, the coldest mafia boss in the East, fell in love and was rejected. Not once, but 3 times. But this isn't about power. This is the story of a man willing to lose everything for a family that isn't his. From which city are you watching? Please like and comment below to let me know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because what happens next will keep you glued to the screen. The rain came down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind that turned the gutters of Aldenmore into rivers and made honest people stay inside. Vincent Moretti didn't stay inside. He hadn't survived 38 years, 12 of them at the top of the Moretti syndicate, by hiding from weather. He stood at the corner of Pelham and 6th in a charcoal overcoat, no umbrella, 2 men behind him at a respectful distance. Dante, his head of security, stood closest. The other, a younger man named Casto, hung back near the black SUV idling at the curb. Neither spoke. They knew better than to speak when Vincent was watching something. He was watching the bookstore. Hail and Bound. The sign above the door was hand-lettered, gold paint on dark wood, slightly chipped on the left side of the ampersand. The lights inside were warm. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could see shelves crowded with paperbacks and a wooden counter near the back where a woman was writing something by hand. Vincent had passed this block 7 times in the last 3 weeks. The first time was by accident, a detour around a police cordon 2 streets over. The second time wasn't an accident. By the 7th, he'd stopped pretending it was anything other than what it was. And the thing that it was made him deeply uncomfortable in a way that he hadn't felt since he was 22 years old and first learning what it cost to order a man's death. He crossed the street. The bell above the door chimed when he pushed it open, a soft sound almost swallowed by the hiss of rain outside. The store smelled like old paper, lamp oil, and something faintly floral, lavender maybe, from a candle somewhere near the back. Rows of shelves stretched to the ceiling on both sides, crammed and slightly chaotic, organized in a way that looked random but probably wasn't. A stepladder leaned against one shelf. A cat, orange and disinterested, regarded him from the top of a display table and then looked away. The woman at the counter didn't look up immediately. She was writing in a ledger, actual handwriting, in a composition book with a cracked spine. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. Her hair was silver gray, cut short but not severely, and she wore a dark blue cardigan over a blouse the color of old cream. She had lines around her eyes and her mouth, the kind that came from decades of real expressions. She wasn't young. She wasn't trying to look young. She looked like someone who had been through something and come out the other side. "Be right with you," she said, without looking up. Vincent stood just inside the door and dripped on the mat. He didn't know why he'd come in. He told himself it was reconnaissance, that he was checking whether this block was worth purchasing. His people had been acquiring property along Pelham for a redevelopment project. That was a lie he'd been telling himself for 3 weeks, and he was getting tired of it. She finished her line in the ledger, capped her pen, and looked up. She didn't react the way most people reacted when they looked at Vincent Moretti. Most people felt it immediately, something in the quality of his stillness, the way he took up space without moving, the eyes that were dark and measuring and gave nothing back. People usually straightened up a little, or smiled too fast, or found something else to look at. The nervous one started talking. This woman took him in calmly, the way you'd take in an overcast sky, not afraid of it, not in love with it either, just noting it. "You're soaked," she said. "It's raining." "I noticed." She came out from behind the counter and picked up a small stack of books someone had left on one of the chairs near the door. She put them on a cart nearby. "Looking for anything in particular, or just waiting out the rain?" "I'm not sure," Vincent said, which was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. That seemed to amuse her slightly. Not a big reaction, just a faint shift at the corner of her mouth. "Well," she said, "we've got history in the back left, fiction along the right wall, and philosophy on the upper shelves if you want something to argue with. Biographies near the window." She nodded toward a narrow alcove at the far end. "I usually point people toward biography when they don't know what they want. Real lives are messier than made-up ones. Sometimes that's the point." Vincent looked at the biography alcove. He looked back at her. "Margaret Hale," he said. Not a question. That did change something. A small stillness came into her face. Not fear, just attention. The kind of attention that came from suddenly realizing the ground had shifted slightly. That's the name on the sign, she said. You already knew who owned this store. Yes? Then you're not here to browse. Probably not. She didn't step back from him. That was the thing about her that had been working at him for 3 weeks. The file on her, assembled by his people with their usual thoroughness, had described a widowed woman running a failing independent bookstore and raising her teenage grandson after losing her daughter and son-in-law in a car accident 4 years prior. The file made her sound like someone beaten down. Someone who'd need something. Most people who needed something looked at Vincent with a particular kind of hungry calculation. Margaret Hale just looked at him like he was a person standing in her store in wet clothes. Are you going to tell me what you actually want? She said. Not tonight, he said. And he turned around and walked back out into the rain. Dante was waiting at the edge of the sidewalk. He had the look of a man who had many questions and had learned over years of employment that asking them was not always wise. You were in there 4 minutes, he said. I know. You didn't buy anything. I know. They got in the car. Casto pulled out into the rain without being told. Dante waited until they were 3 blocks away before he spoke again. You've had us drive past that place 7 times, boss. I'm aware of the count. Is there a problem with the property? Vincent looked out the window at the slicked black street. No. Is there a problem with the owner? A long pause. No, Vincent said. Dante let it go. He was good at letting things go. It was most of why he was still alive and still employed. Mashab. The second time Vincent walked into Hale and Bound was a Saturday afternoon 11 days later. Cleaner weather. He came alone, which was unusual enough that Dante had given him a long look when he said it, but hadn't argued. Margaret was with a customer, an older man in a corduroy jacket who was asking about a biography of a 19th century surveyor, of all things. And she was finding it for him with the efficient certainty of someone who had memorized her entire inventory. She didn't notice Vincent come in, or if she did, she gave no sign. He found the biography alcove. He pulled a book at random, something about a Depression-era labor organizer from Pennsylvania, and stood with it, reading the first page, then the second, then the third. He read 4 pages of a book about a man he'd never heard of while listening to Margaret Hale help 3 separate customers in 20 minutes. She was patient with all of them. She remembered what one of them had been looking for during a previous visit. She made a recommendation to another that made the woman light up with surprised recognition. She didn't perform warmth. She just had it, the way some people have height. It was simply a fact about her. When the store emptied briefly, she came to the alcove. You're back, she said. I told you I might be. You didn't, actually. You left without saying anything. Vincent set the labor organizer book on the nearest shelf. I apologize for the abruptness. She looked at him for a moment. You don't seem like someone who apologizes very often. I'm not. Then I'll take it seriously. She reached past him and straightened the book he'd shelved in the wrong place, putting it back where it belonged. What can I do for you, Mr. Moretti? Vincent Moretti. Nothing. No flicker of recognition, no subtle recalibration. Either she didn't know the name or she was extraordinary at concealing that she did. Mr. Moretti, she said pleasantly, what can I do for you? He had rehearsed this. He told himself he was going to say something direct and efficient, the way he handled everything, state the matter plainly and move on. What came out instead was, I'd like to know what you recommend. She studied him. For what? Are you a reader? I used to be. I've been too busy. What did you read before you got too busy? History mostly, some economics, some fiction when I was younger. What kind of fiction? Whatever was long, he said. I didn't like things that ended too fast. That small shift at the corner of her mouth again. She turned and walked deeper into the store, and after a moment, he followed her. She pulled a thick novel from the fiction wall, something he vaguely recognized by a writer from the South, someone who'd died a few decades back, and handed it to him. It's slow to start, she said. The first 50 pages feel like nothing's happening, but things are always happening. You just have to pay attention to the wrong things on purpose. He took the book. Their hands didn't touch, but nearly did. How much? He said. $14. He paid for it with cash, and the only time in recent memory he'd personally handled a transaction under $10,000. He read the book in 3 days. He came back on the fourth. Month. The pattern established itself over the following weeks with the inevitability of weather. Vincent would come in, alone or nearly so, and they would talk, first about books, then about the neighborhood, then about things less easily categorized. Margaret spoke about her bookstore with the particular mix of love and honest anxiety that people reserve for things they've poured themselves into and aren't sure they can keep. She spoke about her grandson, Oliver, 14 and sharp-tongued and furious at the world, in the way of boys who've lost too much too young. She spoke about her daughter occasionally, briefly, and with a careful economy that told Vincent the wound was still raw in ways she didn't intend to show. She didn't ask much about him. He found this extraordinary. In his world, everyone wanted to know about him, his family history, his wealth, his alliances, his weaknesses. Every conversation was a form of intelligence gathering, even the casual ones. Margaret Hale asked him about the book he'd last read, what he thought of the third act, whether he agreed with the way a particular character had been written. She treated him like a customer who'd become a regular, which was precisely what he was, and the simplicity of that should not have undone him the way it did. One afternoon in October, she said, without particular emphasis, "You know, you never seem to actually need anything. Most people who come in this often are looking for something specific." "I told you," he said. "You recommended I come back." "I recommend a lot of people come back. They don't all listen." "I'm different." She looked at him over her reading glasses. "Yes," she said, in a tone he couldn't quite read. "You are." That was the afternoon he understood, with the flat certainty of a diagnosis, that he was in trouble. His empire did not pause for him to be in trouble. October brought a border dispute with the Calero family out of Newark, a logistical conflict over distribution routes that had been building for 2 years and had now reached the point where people were getting hurt. Vincent handled it the way he handled everything, with precision and without sentimentality. 3 meetings, 2 of which required him to say things in very specific tones that made the other men in the room remember their mortality, and it was resolved without escalation. His people were grateful. The Caleros retreated to their own territory. He came back to Hale and Bound 4 days later with the particular kind of exhaustion that came not from physical effort but from the sustained weight of being the kind of man he was. He wasn't going to tell her any of that. He never told her any of that. He sat in the armchair she'd put out near the biography section after he'd mentioned once that he liked to read while he was there, and he opened whatever book he was halfway through, and he simply existed in a room with Margaret Hale while she ran her store around him. She brought him coffee without asking. Black, which was correct. She remembered things. An hour passed. Oliver came in after school. The grandson, 14 with his mother's dark eyes and his dead father's stubborn jaw, already starting to grow into his height and not quite comfortable with it. He and Vincent had exchanged exactly 6 words across 3 previous visits, a terse greeting the first time, an equally terse departure the second, and a grudging "that's a good one" the third time, when Oliver had noticed what book Vincent was reading. Today Oliver dropped his backpack near the counter, looked at Vincent, and said, "You're here again." "I am." "You come a lot." "I do." Oliver looked at his grandmother and then back at Vincent with the frank, evaluative stare of a boy who had decided adults were mostly not worth trusting and was always gathering evidence about whether that judgment needed updating. "You buying stuff or just sitting there?" "Both, generally." Oliver seemed to find this acceptable. He grabbed a book from behind the counter, something from a stack Margaret apparently kept for him, and settled into the chair on the opposite side of the small reading area and started reading without another word. Margaret, passing through with an armful of new arrivals to shelve, caught Vincent's eye with an expression he'd been cataloging for weeks. Quiet. Watchful. Something underneath it that she kept very well managed. He decided that evening that he would say something. He said it a week later, on a Wednesday, after the last customer had left and Margaret was counting the register. It was the kind of conversation he would have been incapable of 3 months earlier, not because he lacked the vocabulary, but because he'd never had anything to say along these particular lines that he actually meant. He stood at the counter. She had her back to him, writing figures in the ledger. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. She didn't stop writing. "As a thank you for the book recommendations?" "No." The pen paused. She finished the number she was writing, capped the pen, and turned to face him. She took off her reading glasses and held them in one hand. She looked at him for a long moment in the way she had. That even, unafraid, completely present attention that had been remaking something in his chest for months. "Vincent," she said, and it was the first time she'd used his first name, and he felt it. "I know what I'm saying," he said, before she could begin. "I'm not confused about what I'm asking. I want to take you to dinner, and I want to do it because I'd like to spend time with you outside of this store, and that's the whole of it." She was quiet, not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. "How old are you?" she said. 38? "I'm 56. I know. That's 18 years. I know the arithmetic." She set her glasses on the counter. "Vincent, you're a good man to talk to. I genuinely have enjoyed these last few months. But what you're describing doesn't make sense. Not because of the years, though that's part of it. Because of everything else." "What everything else?" She looked at him steadily. "I know who you are. It took me a few weeks to place the name, and then I asked some careful questions and I stopped being uncertain. I know what the Moretti name means in this city." He didn't flinch. And I have a grandson who has already lost everyone. I have a store I'm barely keeping open. I live a very small, very careful life, and I've built it that way on purpose." Her voice was not unkind. That was almost the harder part. "You don't fit in that life, and I don't fit in yours. What you're asking doesn't have anywhere to go." "That's not a no," he said. "It is a no, Vincent. I'm sorry." He nodded. Once. The way he accepted difficult information. "All right," he said. He put on his coat and he left, and he walked 3 blocks in the cold before Dante materialized from the shadows of a parked car where he'd apparently been waiting. "How did it go?" Dante said. Vincent said nothing. Dante asked nothing further. He didn't go back for 2 weeks. He told himself this was respect for her decision, which it partially was. It was also the fact that he'd been rejected, cleanly, gently, without cruelty. And he was 40 days past the point where he could pretend this was about anything other than caring very specifically about this particular woman, and the rejection sat in him like something lodged behind the sternum, present whenever he breathed. He went back on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. He told himself it was because he wanted to return a book. He brought the book. He also bought 2 others. He stayed for an hour. They talked about Oliver, some trouble at school, a conflict with a teacher that Margaret had already handled but was still tired from. They talked about a new bakery that had opened down the block. They talked about nothing that mattered, and Vincent thought, "This is the most normal hour I have spent in 15 years. He was paying for his books when he noticed the ledger was open on the counter. He wasn't trying to read it, but the numbers were hard to miss. Column after column of figures that were telling a clear and uncomfortable story. The store's monthly revenues, the gap between them and the expenses, the shortfall that had been accumulating. "The rent went up again," Margaret said, following his eyes. She said it the way people say things they've stopped being surprised by. Tired, but steady. "By how much?" She told him. He said nothing. He took his books, and he said goodnight, and he left. The next morning, he called his real estate lawyer and gave instructions that he did not share with Dante or anyone else on his team. Within 10 days, the building at Pelham and 6th, along with the 3 adjoining properties, had changed hands in a transaction that moved through 2 holding companies before arriving at a destination that could not easily be traced back to Vincent Moretti. The rent for Hale and Bound did not go up again. In fact, it dropped to a figure that hadn't been current since a decade prior. He never mentioned it to her. November came and went. December arrived with the particular cold of the eastern seaboard. and the particular tension that the holiday season always brought in his line of work. Disputes that had been simmering all year tended to crystallize in December, when money was tight and patience was thin and men with grudges felt them more acutely. He handled two such disputes. He spent an unpleasant 4 days managing a situation involving a business partner who had been skimming accounts for 8 months, a betrayal that required him to make a decision he didn't enjoy making. He made it. He went home. He didn't sleep well. He went to the bookstore on a Tuesday morning before it opened and waited outside in the cold. And when Margaret unlocked the door and found him there, she stopped with her key still in the lock and looked at him the way people look at things that arrive out of sequence. "Early," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." She held the door open and he came in. She went through her opening routine. Lights, register, the coffee machine in the small back room she'd offered him a cup from on 100 previous mornings. He stood at the counter and watched her move through the space with the practiced ease of someone completely at home, and something about that, the completeness of it, the way she belonged to her own life without apology, tightened in his throat. She brought him coffee and stood across the counter from him. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing I want to describe in detail." "Is anyone hurt?" He considered the precision of his answer. "It's been handled." She accepted that in the way she accepted many things he said, without pressing, but not without noticing. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. Outside, the first light was coming gray and thin through the windows. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, even if the answer is the same as before." "All right. Has anything I've done in the last few months, any of it, given you a reason to trust me?" A long pause. She was not being evasive. She was actually considering the question. "Yes," she said finally. "You've been—" "Yes, you have." "Then I'm asking again, not the same way as before, not dinner specifically, just more. More than the store, more than Tuesdays and Thursdays. I want more of whatever this has been." She set down her coffee. She pressed her lips together and looked at the surface of the counter between them. "Vincent," her voice was quiet, "you're 38 years old. In 20 years, you'll be 58. You'll still be a young man, functionally. I'll be 76. I understand that." "I don't think you do. Not really. You're thinking about now. You're not thinking about—" "I'm thinking about everything," he said. "I've had very little else to think about since August. You deserve someone who— I'd like to make my own decisions about what I deserve." The silence that followed was not hostile. It had weight, but it wasn't hostile. "I'm going to ruin something," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, if we try to make it something else, I'm going to ruin it. I ruin things, Vincent. I don't mean to, but I—" She stopped, pressed her lips together again. "My daughter would have been 41 next February. I think about that. I think about the fact that Oliver has no one but me, and I think about what happens to him if I make the wrong choices." "You're not going to ruin anything," Vincent said, "and the wrong choices are not the same as unexpected ones." She looked at him. "Still no," she said, but her voice had changed slightly, not in its answer, but in something around the edges of it. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He bought a book. He left. What he did next, he did not announce and did not explain, even to himself, except in the simplest possible terms. The neighborhood around Pelham and 6th was getting worse. It had been getting worse for 2 years. A crew out of the Wardell district had been expanding their footprint block by block, and their expansion methods were not gentle. 3 businesses on the block south of the bookstore had been vandalized. A family on the corner had been threatened. The situation had the texture of something about to tip. Vincent made certain it did not tip. He did this without drama and without leaving fingerprints. He had a conversation with a man who knew the leadership of the Wardell crew. That man had a conversation with the leadership. The leadership made a calculation about the relative costs of continuing their expansion in this particular direction versus redirecting elsewhere, and they redirected. The block stabilized within 6 weeks. Margaret mentioned it to him one afternoon in January, with a note of surprised relief that the neighborhood had been quieter lately. The anxiety that had been building seemed to have broken, though she wasn't sure why. Vincent said he'd heard it was a management change in some of the local businesses. She looked at him for a moment and said nothing further, but she looked at him. Oliver, who had by this point graduated from terse monosyllables to something approaching actual conversation, told Vincent one afternoon that a group of older boys who'd been giving him trouble on his walk home hadn't been around in 3 weeks. "Funny how that works," Oliver said, in the skeptical tone of a boy who was beginning to connect things. "Things change," Vincent said. "Yeah," Oliver said. "They do." What? February arrived. A cold so brittle it cracked something in Vincent's city, the kind that made the water mains burst and the tempers flare and the old wounds ache. He came to the store on Valentine's Day with no particular plan, just the gravitational pull that had been operating since August, and found Margaret hanging a small display in the window. A cluster of old letters, love letters, he realized, actual physical letters in faded ink, arranged around a typewritten note that said, "Love in all its imperfect forms." He stood outside and watched her arrange them through the glass. She was focused entirely on the task. She moved a letter slightly to the left, then back to the right. She tilted her head. She had a small piece of tape in her mouth, and she took it out to fix one corner and then stepped back to examine the whole. She turned and saw him through the glass. They looked at each other for a moment. She came to the door and opened it. "Come in," she said. "I need a second opinion on this." He studied the display. He told her the letter in the lower right needed to come up 2 inches and the one in the upper left was slightly crooked. She fixed them. "Better?" she said. "Better," he said. She made coffee. They sat in the back room among unopened boxes of new inventory, and she told him about a letter her late husband had written her on their 2nd anniversary. Nothing grand, nothing poetic, just a list of specific things he'd noticed about her that year that he didn't want to forget. She told him this quietly, looking at her hands, and when she finished, she looked up at him. "I'm not over him," she said. "I want you to know that." "I know that," Vincent said. "And I'm not young, and I'm not uncomplicated." "I know that too." "And your world is—" She gestured vaguely, a gesture that encompassed everything she knew or suspected or had chosen not to ask about. "Your world is your world?" "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him for a long time. "I need you to stop asking," she said. "Not because I don't—" She stopped, started again. "I need you to stop asking for now. I need to think, and I can't think clearly when you keep asking." "All right," he said. "I won't ask." "You can keep coming in," she said, as if afraid he'd misunderstood. "I'm not—" "I'll keep coming in," he said. "Okay," she said, quietly. They sat in the back room for another hour, not saying much, surrounded by the smell of old paper and coffee and the particular silence of 2 people who have said something important without quite having said it. And outside, the February city pressed on in its cold and difficult way, and the love letters hung in the window for all the passing strangers to ignore. And Vincent Moretti, who had ordered men broken, who had built an empire from fear and strategy and ruthless patience, sat in a second-hand chair across from a 56-year-old widow who wouldn't have him, and thought that this was inexplicably the most content he had been in longer than he could account for, which was exactly when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A number he didn't recognize. A message of 4 words. "We have the boy." The cold that moved through him then was not February's. He looked up at Margaret, who was reading something, unbothered, her glasses low on her nose, and for 3 seconds he held the knowledge of what that message meant and what it would cost him and what he was going to have to do, and he held it completely still so that none of it showed on his face. Then he stood, put his coat on, and said very calmly, "I have to go." She looked up. Something in his voice reached her. She was too sharp not to notice, and her expression shifted into a careful attention. "Is everything all right?" "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. He walked out of the store into the February cold, and he was already calling Dante before the door had finished closing behind him, and Dante picked up on the first ring, and what Vincent said was not loud and was not panicked, because Vincent Moretti did not panic, but what it was this. Tell me you know where Oliver Hale is right now. The pause on Dante's end lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds was too long. The pause on Dante's end lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds was too long. I don't have eyes on him right now, Dante said. He gets out of school at 3:15. It's 3:40. Find him. Vincent was already moving, cutting through the foot traffic on Pelham with the kind of deliberate speed that didn't look like running, but covered ground faster than most men's jog. And pull the message I just received. Trace the number. I want answers before I'm back at the car. What did the message say? Vincent read it once more from memory. 4 words. Clean, confident, the kind of message written by someone who wasn't afraid of a response. Get me Caruso, he said. And nobody tells the woman in the bookstore anything. Nobody goes near that store. He hung up, turned the corner. The black SUV was at the end of the block and Casto had the engine running before Vincent reached the door, which meant Dante had already been in contact, which meant the machine was moving. Vincent got in. He did not allow himself to think about Margaret's face when he'd said, "I'll be back tomorrow." He did not allow himself to think about what she would do when she found out her grandson was missing, or how long it would take her to find out, or what expression she would wear when the world broke open again for the second time in 4 years. He put the phone to his ear and said, "Caruso, talk to me." Franco Caruso was 61 years old, heavy-set, and had been with the Moretti organization since before Vincent had taken over from his father. He ran intelligence, a title that sounded cleaner than what it actually was, which was, he knew things. He knew who was moving where, who was talking to whom, who had debts and who had grievances, and which grievances had aged into something operational. He was waiting at the secondary safe house on Vance Street when Vincent arrived, seated at the table with his laptop and 3 phones, and the expression of a man who had not liked what he'd found and was organizing how to present it. Vincent sat across from him. Dante stood to his left. 2 other men, Renner and a newer addition named Solis, were near the door. "The number," Caruso said, "is a burner. Activated 48 hours ago. The cell ping puts the origin in the Dockside district." "Cavallo territory," Dante said. "Partially," Caruso said. "The Cavallo family operates out of Dockside, but so do 3 other crews. The number alone doesn't tell us who." "Who would take the boy?" Vincent said. The room was quiet for a moment. Caruso had the look of someone choosing between 2 roads, both of which were going to be uncomfortable. "There are a few people with motive to put pressure on you right now," Caruso said carefully. "The situation in November with the Wardell crew. That got resolved, but not everyone was happy with how it resolved. There's also the Bren situation, the partner you dealt with in December. Bren is handled." "Bren is gone," Caruso said, with precise neutrality. "His brother Sal is not gone. Sal Bren has been having conversations with people in Dockside for 6 weeks. Vincent looked at him. "And you didn't tell me." "I flagged it in the weekly report as a monitoring situation." "A monitoring situation," Vincent said. Caruso didn't look away. He'd been doing this long enough to hold Vincent's stare without flinching, which was one of the reasons Vincent kept him. "At the time, that's what it was," Caruso said. "Sal Bren is not an operator. He's a grieving brother with money and connections and anger. I didn't assess him as an imminent threat." "Reassess," Vincent said. "Already done." Caruso turned the laptop to face him. A photograph, surveillance quality, slightly grainy, showed a thick-necked man in his mid-40s outside a restaurant Vincent recognized as belonging to a mid-level figure in the Dockside network. "That's Sal Bren, taken 8 days ago. The man he's eating with is Eddie Tallow. Tallow does contract work." "What kind of contract work?" "The kind where he finds things people have lost," Caruso said, "and holds them until he's paid to return them." The particular quality of silence that followed was one that Vincent's people recognized. They'd been in rooms with him long enough to know the difference between his angry silences and his cold ones. This was the cold one, which was worse. "Where's the boy?" Vincent said. It wasn't a question anymore. "We don't know yet. We're working it." "Work faster." Vincent stood. "I want Sal Bren found, not touched. Found. And I want to know every location Tallow has used in the last year." "Vincent." Dante's voice had a careful quality. If Bren is behind this and we move on him directly, it escalates. We're talking about an active grab on a civilian. That's a different conversation than, I know what it is, Vincent said. He may be trying to force a reaction, draw you out into a move that gives him legal cover or backing from Dante. The word wasn't loud. It landed anyway. Find the boy. What? Oliver Hale was not easy to find because Oliver Hale, age 14 and deeply suspicious of the world he'd been left in, did not follow predictable patterns. He took different routes home from school depending on what mood he was in. He spent time at the school library some days, at a convenience store 3 blocks away on others, occasionally at a friend's house on Denton Street. He was not a child who checked in regularly. Margaret had gotten used to the particular anxiety of that. What the people looking for Oliver discovered over the next 2 hours was that he had left school at the normal time, taken the route home that passed through Callaway Park, and had not arrived at the bookstore by 4:30. What they also discovered, by pulling the Park City security cameras and cross-referencing the feed with a vehicle registered to a holding company that Caruso's people identified in 40 minutes of aggressive data work, was that Oliver had been approached by 2 men near the south entrance of the park at 3:22 in the afternoon. The conversation in the footage was brief. Oliver had tried to walk away. He had not succeeded. The vehicle, a gray cargo van, plates switched, had gone east on Harbor Road and then out of camera range. Caruso laid all of this in front of Vincent at 6 in the evening. Vincent looked at the still frame of Oliver mid-struggle, one arm half raised, face turned, and felt something move through him that was not anger in any ordinary sense. It was older than anger. It was the thing that lived underneath anger, the thing that only surfaced when something that mattered was in danger. Tallow has a warehouse off the industrial pier at Dockside, Caruso said. He's used it twice in the last 18 months for similar situations, both resolved financially. How long does he usually hold? First contact is usually 24 to 48 hours after the grab. He lets the fear build. He's already made contact, Vincent said. He set his phone on the table so Caruso could see the message again. We have the boy. This came at 4:17, before the boy was even reported missing to anyone. He wanted you to know immediately, Dante said. He's not hiding what this is. No, Vincent said. He's not. He picked the phone back up. He wants me scared. He wants me reactive. He wants me to move wrong so he has something to leverage or something to document. So we don't move wrong, Dante said. Correct. Vincent sat back in his chair. There was something happening behind his eyes. A calculation running that his people recognized as the mode he operated in before things became conclusive. We don't touch Tallow directly. We don't touch Bren. We find the warehouse, we confirm the boy is there, and we do what we do quietly. No confrontation, no theater. Caruso nodded slowly. And then? And then we see who Sal Bren is actually working with, because Sal Bren is not smart enough to have run this alone. The room absorbed that. You think there's someone else, Dante said. I think a grieving brother with money and anger and a mid-level fixer like Tallow gets you a clumsy grab on a civilian. It doesn't get you 4 words sent to my personal number within 40 minutes of the grab. Vincent looked at Caruso. That number, the burner, you said it was activated 48 hours ago. That's right. Who knew about the boy? Caruso's expression shifted very slightly. What do you mean? Who in this organization, Vincent said slowly, knew that Oliver Hale existed, that he mattered to me, that taking him would get a reaction. The silence that followed was a different kind than all the ones before it. It was the silence of a room full of people realizing the problem was closer than they'd been looking, just. He called Margaret at 7:43. He hadn't decided what to say until she picked up, and even then, what he said wasn't what he'd intended. Oliver isn't home yet, she said, before he could speak. Her voice was controlled in the particular way of a woman who has already moved through the first spike of fear and arrived at the functional place on the other side of it, because she'd had practice. I called the school. I called his friend Marcus. I was about to call the police. Don't call the police yet, Vincent said. Silence. Margaret. Where is he? Not a question. A flat statement. She already knew something. She was the kind of woman who heard things in the silence around words. "He's safe," Vincent said, which was what he intended to be true. "He's going to be safe." "That's not the same as telling me where he is." "I know." "Vincent." Her voice dropped. Not soft, compressed, like something under very high pressure. "I need you to tell me right now what is happening to my grandson." "I can't tell you everything right now," he said. "What I can tell you is that I know where he is, and I have people moving toward him, and you need to stay in the store, or go to your apartment above it, and you need not to call anyone. Not the police, not anyone." "Are you telling me not to call the police because calling the police would put him in more danger, or because it would create problems for you?" He absorbed the precision of that question. It was exactly the right question, and she'd arrived at it in under a minute. "Both," he said, "but mostly the first." She breathed. He heard it. One long, controlled breath, the kind that was doing significant structural work. "How long?" she said. "Tonight. I'll have him back tonight. If you're wrong..." "I'm not wrong." "If you're wrong," she said again, because she was not a woman who accepted interruptions on matters of this gravity, "I will call every person I can call, and I will light up every street between here and wherever he is, and whatever consequences that creates for you will not be my concern." "I understand that," he said. "Do you?" "Margaret." He stopped. He was standing at the window of the safe house looking at the Vance Street traffic below, and for a moment everything in him, all the machinery, all the calculation, all the control, went very still. "I understand that, and I understand why you don't trust me completely right now, but I need you to give me a few hours. That's all. A few hours." A pause so long he thought she'd hung up. "A few hours," she said. "Yes." "And then you bring him back?" "Yes." "And then," she said, "you're going to explain to me exactly what happened and why, and what your connection to it is. All of it." "Yes," he said. "I will." She hung up. He stood with the phone in his hand and felt the weight of that last agreement settling on him like a physical thing. Because when he explained it to her, all of it, the warehouse, Sal Bren, the fact that Oliver had been taken precisely because of Vincent's connection to her, she was going to arrive at a conclusion. And the conclusion was going to be the same one she'd arrived at in October and February, except this time it would have evidence behind it instead of just logic. He put the phone in his pocket and turned back to the room. "Talk to me about the warehouse," he said. Tallow's warehouse was a converted fish processing facility at the end of a commercial pier that had been decommissioned in the 90s. It smelled, reportedly, of salt and rust and something industrial that had never fully aired out. It had 2 entry points, a vehicle bay in the front and a smaller door on the eastern side. And it had, according to Caruso's source, who had been inside 8 months ago, a series of small divided rooms in the rear that had been the facility's old cold storage. "The boy will be in cold storage," Caruso said. "Not because it's cold. The refrigeration units haven't worked in years, but because the walls are thick and there are no windows." "Guards?" "Tallow runs lean. 2, maybe 3 people inside. He's not expecting a response tonight. He only sent the first message 4 hours ago. His playbook is to let the target spend the night thinking and make the money call in the morning." "Then tonight is our window," Dante said. "Tonight is our window," Vincent agreed. He looked around the room. Renner and Solis were both watching him with the focused calm of men who had done this before. He didn't enjoy this part. He'd never enjoyed it. People who worked for him often assumed he did, because he was good at it, and competence can look like pleasure from the outside. He was good at it the way a surgeon could be good at amputations, through practice and necessity and a genuine desire for the outcome, not the procedure. "I go in with Dante and Renner," he said. "Solis stays on Caruso and monitors communication. We go in quiet. We come out with the boy. We do not engage Tallow unless there is absolutely no other option, and if there is no other option, we still don't make noise." "And Sal Bren," Dante said. "Sal Bren," Vincent said, "can wait one more night." But he was already thinking about the other question, the one that mattered more than Sal Bren, more than tallow, more than the warehouse. The person in his organization who had known about Oliver, who had known about Margaret, who had taken that knowledge to someone outside. He looked at the people in the room one at a time. He did it openly, without subtlety. He let them know he was doing it. Caruso looked back at him with the steady gaze of a man with nothing to hide, or a man very good at looking that way. Dante looked back with something close to hurt, which was either genuine or the appropriate response to being looked at this way by a man you'd served for 12 years. Renner and Solus looked back with the professional blankness of men who understood the look meant something but weren't sure what. None of this told him anything he could use. That was the problem. "Let's move," Vincent said. The pier was dark and cold and smelled exactly as described. They parked 2 blocks back and went on foot along the water, the 3 of them, dressed down, nothing that said professional except the way they moved. Vincent had a weapon. He'd carried one since he was 22. He wasn't thinking about using it. He was thinking about the eastern door, the cold storage rooms in the back, a 14-year-old boy who'd already had too much taken from him. He was thinking about what he was going to say to Margaret afterward. He was not thinking about the 4th man. The 4th man was inside the warehouse, which was one more than Caruso's intelligence had projected, and he was positioned at the eastern door rather than the front, which suggested someone had anticipated an approach from the east, which was information that should not have been available to anyone who hadn't heard the conversation in the safe house. Vincent saw the 4th man 1 second before the 4th man saw him. In that second, he felt everything that mattered about the evening reorganize itself into a different configuration. Not panic, because he didn't panic, but the cold and total recognition that he'd been right about the inside problem, that someone had fed information that the warehouse was not the shape they'd believed it to be, and that Oliver Hale was somewhere in there, and the next 3 minutes were going to determine whether Vincent got out of this situation with everything intact or arrived on the other side of it with a completely different set of problems. Dante moved first, a fast, low grab that took the 4th man before he could bring his radio to his mouth. And Vincent was already through the door before the scuffle behind him resolved, Renner covering, moving into the dark interior with his back to the wall and his eyes adjusting to the thin yellow work light at the far end of the space. And from somewhere in the back he heard a sound. A voice. Young. Tight with fear but not broken. Oliver's voice saying, "Who's there?" Not a call for help, just a demand. Even now, even scared, he was demanding. And something in Vincent's chest, that thing that had been lodged there since August, the thing that had been living just behind his sternum, the thing he hadn't named out loud to anyone, moved. He moved toward the sound, and what he was carrying now was not just the weight of tonight, or of Margaret's voice on the phone, or of the traitor somewhere behind him in a room full of trusted faces. What he was carrying was the understanding that had been growing in him for 6 months, and had just, in the dark and cold of a decommissioned fish warehouse, become something he could no longer manage quietly. He was not going to be able to keep these 2 worlds separate. He had believed, without examining the belief too closely, that he could be the man in the bookstore and the man he was everywhere else, and that the distance between those 2 men could be maintained with enough discipline. He understood now, moving through the dark toward the voice of a boy he had no formal claim on, that the distance was gone. It had been gone for months. And someone had already figured that out before he did, and used it. And the person who had used it was sitting in a room on Vance Street right now, watching a monitor, and waiting to see what he would do next. Oliver was in the 3rd room. The cold storage section of the warehouse was a narrow corridor with 4 doors cut into the left wall, each one a thick steel panel with a sliding bolt on the outside. 3 of the doors were open. The 3rd was closed and bolted, and from behind it came the sound of a boy who had decided that fear was not something he was going to perform for whoever was listening. Vincent slid the bolt. The door opened, and Oliver was on his feet in the same instant, back against the far wall, hands up in the inadequate defensive posture of someone who had never been trained to fight but had decided to try anyway. When the light from the corridor caught Vincent's face, the hands came down slowly. Oliver stared at him. "You," the boy said. "Come on," Vincent said. Oliver didn't move immediately. He was 14 and he'd been grabbed off a park path and locked in a dark room for 3.5 hours, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing the rapid calculation of someone trying to determine whether the current situation was better or different from the previous one. "My grandmother," he said. "She's at the store. She's fine. Come on." Oliver crossed the room in 4 steps. He didn't say anything else. He didn't cry. Vincent noted this the way he noted everything, with the part of his attention that never fully stopped cataloging, and then he put his hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, a light contact, directional, and they moved back through the corridor toward the eastern door where Dante was waiting. Renner was at the far end of the warehouse. He gave a short nod that meant the front was clear. They moved out into the cold, salt air of the pier and walked, all 4 of them, back toward the parked car without running, because running attracted attention, and they had none to spare. Oliver didn't ask questions until they were in the car and 3 blocks away. "Who were those people?" he said. "Not important right now," Vincent said. "It's important to me." "I know. I'll explain what I can later." Oliver looked at him from the back seat, that measuring stare, the one that had been cataloging Vincent for months with the unsentimental accuracy of a boy who'd learned not to extend trust by default. "Does my grandmother know about this?" Oliver said. "About whatever you are, whatever this is." Vincent kept his eyes forward. "She knows some of it. How much?" "Oliver, how much does she know?" "Enough," Vincent said. "More than she wanted to." Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then, "She kept letting you come to the store." "Yes." "Even knowing?" "Yes." Another silence, longer this time. "She doesn't let people in," Oliver said, not to Vincent specifically, more to the air of the car. "Since my mom, she's careful." Vincent said nothing. "She let you in," Oliver said. The car moved through the nighttime streets. Nobody spoke the rest of the way. He dropped Oliver at the bookstore just before 10. Margaret was at the door before the car had stopped, and the moment Oliver stepped out, she had him. Both arms, no ceremony, the particular grip of someone who had been managing their fear very precisely for several hours and had just been given permission to stop managing it. Oliver, 14 and too old for this in his own mind, held on anyway. His hands gripped the back of her cardigan and he stood very still. Vincent watched from the car. After a moment, Margaret looked up. Across the roof of the vehicle, through the glass, they looked at each other. She didn't smile. She didn't mouth a thank you. She just looked at him with those eyes that never gave more than she intended them to give, and what she gave him in that moment was something he didn't have a clean name for. He rolled the window down. "I'll be here at 8 tomorrow morning," he said. She held his gaze for another second. "I know," she said. She took Oliver inside. The door closed. The store light was warm and yellow through the window, and then they were gone from his view, and he told Casto to drive. He had work to do. The safe house on Vance Street smelled of cold coffee and tension when he walked back in at 10:20. Caruso was at the table. Solis was near the window. The room had the particular atmosphere of a place where people had been waiting and not talking, each occupied with their own version of the same calculation. Dante was not in the room. Dante was in the smaller back room, which had a single chair in it and no windows. He was sitting in that chair when Vincent came in and closed the door behind him. Vincent looked at him. Dante Ricci was 51 years old. He'd been with Vincent's father before he'd been with Vincent. He had a wife in the suburbs and 2 daughters in college and a brother-in-law he'd helped get work in a legitimate freight business that Vincent had quietly arranged 3 years ago as a gift, or what had felt like a gift at the time. He sat in the chair with his forearms on his knees and his hands loose between them and his eyes on the floor. "Say it," Vincent said. A long pause. "Sal Bren came to me in November," Dante said. His voice was steady, not defiant, not apologetic, just steady in the way of someone who has already made their accounting and knows what the numbers are. He said he wasn't after blood. He said he wanted you to feel what losing something felt like. The temperature in Vincent's chest dropped several degrees. "He said he'd leave me and my family out of everything that was coming if I gave him something to use," Dante said. "He didn't specify, just something something you cared about enough that it would register. And you gave him Oliver. I gave him the name of the store. I didn't. I told myself he'd use it as leverage only, a negotiating chip. I didn't think he'd actually. You told yourself, Vincent said. Dante looked up then. For the first time. His eyes were reddened at the rims and his jaw was tight, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy and was now setting it down and was not yet sure what that felt like. I told myself a lot of things, he said. Most of them were wrong. Vincent stood with his back against the closed door. He breathed once, slowly. He was aware of his own hands. They were at his sides, relaxed, which required work. He was aware of the quality of his own focus, the way it had narrowed to this room and this man and the specific shape of what had happened. 12 years. He'd known this man for 12 years. He'd trusted him with the architecture of everything, logistics, security, the decision-making chain that kept the organization intact and functional. He'd trusted him in the way you only trust someone after they've been tested and passed and been tested again. He'd trusted him the way his father had trusted him, which was the oldest and most foundational trust he had. Why didn't you come to me? Vincent said, not loudly. When Bren approached you, why didn't you come to me immediately? Because he had documentation, Dante said. On my brother-in-law. The freight business. There are things in the early days when it was getting set up that weren't clean. Bren had paper on it. If it came out, it wouldn't touch me or you, but it would destroy Marco, his family, his kids. And you made a decision to protect Marco by handing Bren a 14-year-old boy. The bluntness of it hit Dante visibly. He absorbed it without looking away. I didn't think that's what I was doing, he said. That is what I did. I know that's what I did. He paused. The boy is safe? The boy is home. Dante nodded. Once. He seemed to exhale something that had been compressed in him since early that afternoon. Whatever you decide, he said. I'm not going to argue it. Vincent looked at the man he'd spent 12 years trusting and thought about all the things that word meant and all the ways its meaning had just been retroactively altered. Not erased. That was the thing about betrayal that nobody talked about honestly. It didn't erase what had come before. It just permanently changed the context of it. Everything that had been real was still real. It was just also this. I'm not going to decide anything tonight, Vincent said. You don't move, you don't make calls, you don't contact anyone. You sit here and you wait. All right, Dante said. Vincent opened the door and left, and did not look back. Caruso was waiting in the hall. You heard, Vincent said. Enough of it. Sal Bren has documentation on Marco Ricci's freight business. Find out how real it is and what it would take to neutralize it. He moved past Caruso toward the main room. And I want everything we have on Sal Bren on the table by 6 in the morning. Bank accounts, property, every person he's had a meal with in the last 6 months. Vincent, Caruso spoke carefully, the Bren situation. How do you want to handle the fact that he got inside? That he found a pressure point and used it? If word gets out that someone used a civilian to move against you and you... I'm aware of what it looks like, Vincent said. The other families will read softness. They'll read... I said I'm aware. Caruso stopped talking. Vincent sat at the main table and poured the cold coffee into a cup and drank it anyway. He stared at the top of the table. He thought about Dante in the back room. He thought about Marco Ricci, who ran an honest freight business and had a family, and how easily one person's secret could be used to lever open an entire architecture of trust. He thought about the woman he was going to face at 8 in the morning and everything he'd agreed to explain. He sat with the cold coffee and the arithmetic of his life, and he didn't sleep. 8 in the morning came gray and damp. He arrived at the bookstore exactly when he'd said he would. Margaret opened the door before he knocked. She was dressed. The store wasn't open yet. It opened at 10 on Thursdays, and the lights were at half, and she had coffee made, and she had the look of a woman who also had not slept. Oliver was upstairs. Vincent knew this because Margaret gestured briefly toward the ceiling when she let him in, a gesture that communicated both he's there and this conversation doesn't include him. They sat at the small table in the back room, the same place they'd sat on Valentine's Day with the love letters in the window. Margaret set 2 cups of coffee on the table and sat across from him and folded her hands in front of her and looked at him. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He told her about the Moretti organization, not in the way that files described it, not in the abstract language of structure and territory, but in the functional reality of what it was and how it operated and what he had spent 16 years of his adult life doing. He told her about the Bren situation in December. He told her about Sal Bren and what he'd done and how he'd done it. He told her about the warehouse. He told her about Dante. He told her about the rent. This last one changed something in her face, a shift that was not anger exactly, but was in the same family as anger, something that had more grief in it than heat. "The rent dropped in November," she said. "Yes." "That was you." "Yes." She looked at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, the thing in her face had settled into something very still. "What else?" she said. "The Wardell crew," he said. "The neighborhood improving. That was also me." She was quiet for a long time. "I want to ask you something," she said finally, "and I want you to answer it exactly honestly." "All right." "Oliver was taken," she said, "because someone in your organization knew that he mattered to you. They knew that because you matter to me. Is that correct?" "That is correct." She absorbed this. She looked at her coffee. She looked at her hands. "So the danger that came into Oliver's life," she said, "came in through the door that you opened." It was not a question. It was a statement of physics, cause and effect, no drama in it, just the clean, hard edge of a true thing. "Yes," Vincent said. She nodded very slowly. "I told you in October," she said. "I told you the worlds didn't fit, that your world would—" "You were right," he said. "You were right, and I believed I could manage it, and I was wrong." "Oliver could have been—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. She pressed her lips together with the deliberate control of someone refusing to follow a thought to its full conclusion in front of another person. "He has already lost everything once. He was 7 years old when his mother— When my daughter—" She stopped again. "I know," Vincent said. "You don't know." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You don't know what it is to sit in a hospital and be told your child is gone, and then have to go home and tell a 7-year-old boy that the 2 people who were supposed to be permanent in his life are not coming back. You don't know what the next 3 years looked like, what he looked like, what I—" She pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. Then she put her hand back on the table and looked at him directly. "I built something careful. I built something small and careful and safe for that boy. And you walked into it." "Yes," he said, "I did. And now a man I have never met almost—" She stopped. "Yes," he said. They sat in the silence of all the things that were true. "I want you to hear me," she said. Her voice was different now, lower, and with a precision to it that he recognized as the voice she used when she was saying something she had already fully decided. "I'm grateful that you got him back. I am. I understand that you moved fast and that it could have been— I understand what it would have been if you hadn't." She looked at him. "And I'm telling you, Vincent, that you cannot come back here." The air in the room didn't move. "I know you care," she said. "I believe that you care. But caring doesn't make you safe. Caring doesn't undo the fact that the people in your world know about this store, know about Oliver, and will use both of those things as long as you are connected to us." She picked up her coffee, then set it down again without drinking. "My answer has always been no. It was no for good reasons. Last night added reasons I didn't have before." Vincent sat with this. He sat with the particular quality of pain that had a very specific shape, not the blunt pain of a wound, but the precise pain of a thing being cut along the correct line. It hurt exactly as much as true things hurt. "All right," he said. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. He could hear that she meant it, and somehow that was the part that required the most from him. "Don't be," he said. "You're right." He stood. He put on his coat. He looked at her once more across the small table in the back room of her bookstore. The lavender candle, the cracked-spined ledger, the cat he could hear moving somewhere in the shelves. And he held the look for exactly as long as it asked to be held. Then he turned and walked through the store and out the door into the gray morning. He stood on the sidewalk outside Hale and Bound for 30 seconds. The street was quiet. A delivery truck moved past. Somewhere above him, in the apartment over the store, he could hear Oliver's footsteps moving from one room to another. The particular weight of a teenage boy starting his morning, ordinary and alive. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. A number he didn't know, but the prefix was one he recognized. It belonged to a network of communications routed through a server cluster that the Cavallo family used when they wanted clean lines. He answered. The voice on the other end was not Eddie Tallo's. It was not Sal Bren's. It was a voice he recognized immediately, one he had not heard in 4 years, a voice that belonged to a man he had believed, based on very thorough evidence, to be permanently outside the current situation. The voice said, "I hear the boy is home safe." Good. I'd hate for there to have been any permanent damage before we had a chance to talk. Vincent went completely still on the sidewalk outside the bookstore. "You have 24 hours to respond to my terms," the voice said. "If you don't respond, the next time I reach into your life and pull something out, I will not be returning it." The line went dead. Vincent stood on the gray sidewalk and looked at the closed door of Hale and Bound and understood, with the totality of a man whose last calculation has just been proven wrong, that last night had not been the Bren family's operation. It had been a demonstration. And the man who had just called him, the man behind the demonstration, was not interested in money or territory or the kind of leverage that could be negotiated away. He was interested in the organization itself, all of it. And he had just proven, with the elegant and devastating efficiency of a single well-placed grab, that he knew exactly where Vincent Moretti kept the things he was not willing to lose. The voice belonged to Gerard Voss. Vincent stood on the sidewalk and let that fact arrange itself into its full shape. Gerard Voss, 64 years old, former partner of Vincent's father, the man who had built the Eastern distribution network before Vincent had dismantled it 4 years ago during the consolidation. The restructuring that had cost Voss his position, his revenue streams, and according to the intelligence Vincent had received 8 months later, his presence in the country entirely. Voss had relocated. That was the word his people had used. Relocated. To somewhere in Europe, the information was imprecise, which had bothered Vincent less than it should have. He'd been imprecise about Gerard Voss, and now a 14-year-old boy had spent 3.5 hours in a cold storage room because of it. He walked away from the bookstore door. He kept walking until he reached the end of the block, then turned left and kept going, because he needed to move while he thought, and he needed to think without anyone watching his face while he did it. Gerard Voss. Not Sal Bren. Bren was a tool, a man with a grudge who'd been found and used. Not Tallow. Tallow was contract labor, indifferent to the specifics. Voss had found Bren and shaped the grievance into an instrument and used it to deliver a message that was not about Oliver at all. Oliver was punctuation. The message was the message. I know what you have. I can reach it. Respond to my terms in 24 hours. He stopped at the corner of Pelham and Wharton and called Caruso. Gerard Voss, he said, when Caruso answered. A silence. Say that again, Caruso said. You heard me. He just called my personal number. He was behind last night. Bren was his instrument. Another silence, longer this time, with a different quality. The quality of a man rapidly rebuilding a structural model from scratch. Voss has been in Portugal, Caruso said. Our last confirmed intelligence on Voss is clearly wrong, Vincent said. I need everything repulled. Today. Every asset, every known contact, every property we have on record. And I need to know who in our network has had contact with anyone from Voss's old circle in the last 12 months. That's Vincent. That's a significant undertaking. Then start immediately. He hung up and stood at the corner of Pelham and Wharton with the gray morning moving around him. A woman walking a dog, a man with a paper coffee cup, the city entirely indifferent to the specific gravity of what he was holding. And he made the next call. The man who answered was named Prescott. He was an attorney, officially, though the work Vincent used him for occupied a space well outside normal legal practice. He was discreet, expensive, and had never once in 14 years asked a question he didn't need the answer to. "I need to meet," Vincent said. "Today. 2 hours. I have a... Cancel it." A brief pause. 2 hours, Prescott said. The meeting with Prescott lasted 90 minutes and covered ground that Vincent had been circling for years without landing on. He had known, in the abstract way that men in his position always knew, that the life had an expiration, not a moral expiration. He was not given to that kind of reasoning, but a practical one. Empires consolidated or they collapsed. The territory he controlled was significant enough that it attracted the kind of attention that eventually became untenable, and the older he got, the more the attention cost. He had simply never before had a specific reason to stop abstractly knowing it and start doing something about it. He laid out what he wanted. Prescott listened without interrupting, which was his great professional gift. When Vincent finished, Prescott looked at his notes for a long moment. "This is not a small thing you're describing," Prescott said. "No. Dismantling a structure of this size, this complexity, in a way that provides you with legal insulation, that takes time, months minimum, a year more likely. I know that. I'm not asking for instant, I'm asking for a plan. And the federal interest. You understand that cooperation... I understand what cooperation means," Vincent said. "I've understood it for a long time. I'm asking you to begin the conversation through the right channels." Prescott looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. "Something changed," Prescott said. "Not a question." "Several things," Vincent said. "Over several months." Prescott accepted this with the neutrality of a man paid to accept things. "I'll make some calls this afternoon. Initial conversations only. Nothing binding, nothing on record. To understand what's possible." "That's all I'm asking for today," Vincent said. He left Prescott's office and got back in the car and told Casto to go to Vance Street, and on the drive over he sat with the particular stillness of a man who has just committed to something irreversible in the only way that mattered. Not by signing anything, not by telling anyone, but by deciding, without any remaining room for revision, that the decision was made. The problem was that 24 hours was not enough time to dismantle an empire. 24 hours was, in fact, barely enough time to understand the full shape of what Voss wanted. Caruso had pulled together what he could by early afternoon. The picture that emerged was not clean. Voss had been operating out of the Portuguese coast for 2 years, which was longer than their intelligence had suggested, and in that time he had been systematically rebuilding, not the specific network Vincent had dismantled, but something adjacent to it. New relationships, new channels. He had money from the old days, enough to be patient, and patience was the thing Vincent had consistently underestimated about him. What Voss wanted, according to the 3 separate sources Caruso tapped in the space of 6 hours, was the distribution network. Not money, not territory in the traditional sense. The infrastructure, the routes, the relationships, the operational knowledge that had taken 20 years to build and could not simply be reconstructed from scratch by someone who'd been away. He wanted Vincent to hand it to him, and if Vincent didn't, the next demonstration would not involve a 14-year-old boy returned safely to his grandmother. Vincent sat at the Vance Street table and looked at the assembled information and felt the specific cold of a situation that had no clean exit. He could refuse Voss and absorb whatever came next, which would be worse, and would come for the people around him with the specificity that Voss had already demonstrated he was capable of. He could comply with Voss's terms, which would mean handing operational control of a criminal network to a man who would use it worse than Vincent ever had, and would leave Vincent exposed in the aftermath. Or he could move on Voss directly, find him and neutralize the threat at its source, which required knowing where he was, which they didn't, and doing it cleanly enough that the backup plans Voss certainly had in place did not automatically execute. None of these were good options. One of them was necessary. "Where is he?" Vincent said. Caruso looked at him. "We don't have a confirmed..." "Where do you think he is?" Caruso spread his hands on the table over the maps and documents and photographs. "He called you from a clean line routed through Cavallo infrastructure. That could be a misdirect or it could be genuine. If it's genuine, he's somewhere with access to the Cavallo network, which puts him somewhere on the eastern seaboard. He's here, Vincent said. He came back to manage this personally. He's been here long enough to turn Dante, find Bren, set up Tallow, and run last night's operation. He looked at the table. He's here, and he's been here for months, and we didn't see it. The room was quiet. The leak, Renner said from near the door. It was the most he'd said in 2 days. We assumed it was Dante, but Dante only knew about the boy because he'd been watching you personally. Voss knew things that required deeper access, operational detail, route information. More than one, Vincent said. It would explain the quality of last night's setup, Renner said. The fourth man at the eastern door. Someone told Tallow which approach you'd use. Someone who was in the room on Vance Street when we planned it, Caruso said, and then stopped, because the implication of that sat on the room like a dropped weight. Everyone in that room looked at everyone else in that room. Vincent said, Solis. Solis was not in the room. Solis had been given a task that morning and sent out, and Vincent realized as he said the name that this was the third time in 12 hours he'd been a step behind, and that being a step behind was not a pattern he recognized in himself and was not one he could afford to continue. Find him, Vincent said. Now. They found Solis 40 minutes later, which was too long. He was at a cafe 6 blocks away, and when Renner and 2 others walked in, he saw them immediately and made a calculation that lasted about 1 second before he stood up and threw the table sideways and ran for the back exit. He made it 4 steps into the alley before Renner caught him. They brought him back to Vance Street and put him in the back room where Dante had been sitting the previous night, and Vincent came in and closed the door and stood over a man who was breathing hard through his nose with his hands zip-tied to the chair arms, and his eyes moving between defiance and the particular fear that comes from knowing exactly how bad the situation is. Voss, Vincent said. Solis looked at him. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, Vincent said. Where is he? I don't know where. Vincent leaned down and put both hands on the arms of the chair and brought his face close to Solis's and said very quietly, I have known for 11 months that someone in this organization had a secondary relationship. I have suspected it was Dante for 6 of those months because Dante gave me a reason to suspect him. Last night I realized Dante was real, but he was also convenient. He was a thing placed in front of me to look at while I was being moved around. So, he straightened. I'm going to ask you once more, and what happens after that depends entirely on what you say. Solis was sweating, his jaw was working. He'll come after my family, Solis said. Your family is already in this situation, Vincent said. Voss put them there when he recruited you. That's not going to change based on what happens in this room. What changes is whether I am in a position to do something about it. Solis looked at him for a long moment. The fear and the defiance were both still there, but they were rearranging, the way things rearrange when a person stops calculating and starts simply choosing. Hotel Carnal, Solis said. The Carnal on Harbor Avenue. He took the 6th floor 2 weeks ago under a company name. I don't know which room specifically. How many people with him? 4 that I've seen. He travels light now. He doesn't trust large teams. How does he communicate? Clean phones, new ones every few days. He calls out. He doesn't receive. Vincent stood back. Who knew he was here besides you? In this organization? Just me. He was careful about that. Did he know about the extraction last night, before it happened? I told him the plan when you gave it, Solis said. Yes. Vincent nodded once. He walked to the door, then stopped. Your family, he said, without turning around. I'll make sure they're covered. That's not contingent on anything. It's just what I'm going to do. He left the room and didn't wait to hear Solis's response. Hotel Carnal was a mid-range business hotel on Harbor Avenue, 12 stories. The kind of place with enough transient traffic that a man with 4 associates and clean phones could occupy a floor for 2 weeks without attracting comment. The 6th floor had 6 rooms. Voss would be in whichever one faced the street. He'd always liked to see what was coming. Vincent looked at the building from across Harbor Avenue with Caruso beside him and felt the particular kind of clarity that comes when the options are gone and there is only the thing that must be done. If we go in there, Caruso said, it crosses a line that doesn't uncross. I know. If Voss doesn't come out of that building, his backup plans execute. He'll have triggers set, people notified automatically. I know that too. So going in is not... I'm not going in to kill him, Vincent said. I'm going in to talk to him, face to face. No intermediaries, no phones, no demonstration. He looked at the building. He wants the network. I'm going to offer him something different. Caruso looked at him sideways. What are you offering? The truth, Vincent said. That the network is already ending. That I've already put things in motion that will dismantle it with or without his involvement, and that in 6 months what he wants won't exist in a form he can use. He won't believe that. He might. If I say it to his face, in person, with nothing in my hands. Vincent looked at Caruso. Voss is 64. He's been patient for 4 years. He's not suicidal and he's not irrational. If he understands that the leverage he's built is about to become worthless, he has a decision to make. And if he doesn't make the right decision, then we have a different problem, Vincent said, but we don't have it yet. He crossed Harbor Avenue alone. The lobby of the Carnal was beige carpet and muted lighting and a front desk with a woman who looked up as he came in and smiled with professional blankness. He didn't stop at the desk. He went to the elevator and pressed 6 and rode up in the particular silence of a small enclosed space moving upward, and he thought briefly and completely about the bookstore, about the February light through the window, about a woman who had been right about him from the beginning and had been right again this morning. He thought about what it would mean to prove that she was wrong about one thing. The elevator opened on the 6th floor. The hallway was empty. He walked to the room that faced the street, 608, and knocked 3 times. Silence. Then the sound of movement inside, unhurried. The door opened and Gerard Voss stood there in a dark suit, no tie, looking precisely as he had 4 years ago, heavier in the face, perhaps, and the gray at his temples had gone all the way through now, but the eyes were the same, pale and intelligent and deeply comfortable with patience. He looked at Vincent without surprise. You came alone, Voss said. Yes. And you didn't call first. You told me 24 hours. I'm using 12. Vincent met the pale eyes. Can I come in? Voss stepped back from the door. Vincent entered the room. It was a standard business double. Desk, bed, a chair near the window, the Harbor Avenue traffic visible below. 2 other men were visible through the open connecting door to the adjacent room. They'd registered Vincent's entrance and positioned themselves without being told. Voss was indeed traveling light. 4 men total, probably, which matched Solis's count. Vincent sat in the chair near the window without being invited to. Voss remained standing near the desk. This was a choice on Voss's part. He preferred height advantages in conversations, and Vincent noted it and said nothing about it. The organization is coming down, Vincent said. Not because of you. I'd already started the process. I have an attorney working federal channels as of this morning. Voss looked at him. You expect me to believe you began dismantling a 30-year structure this morning. I began it this morning officially. I began it in my head approximately 6 months ago. Last night accelerated the timeline. Because of the boy? Because of everything the boy represents, Vincent said. The network you want will not exist in 18 months, maybe 12. If you've done your research, and I know you have, you know that I don't say things I don't intend. That's always been the difference between us. Voss was quiet for a moment. He moved to the desk and picked up a glass of water and drank from it and set it back down with the deliberate slowness of a man who managed his own responses very carefully. You're asking me to stand down, Voss said. I'm telling you that what you came back for is going to be gone before you can take it. Standing down is just the logical response to that information. And the federal cooperation, you'd name names. I'd name names that aren't yours, Vincent said. You've been out of the country for 4 years. What you've built in Portugal is outside my knowledge and outside my scope. I have no interest in you specifically. You have every interest in me specifically. I just put your woman's grandson in a warehouse. The room temperature didn't change, but something in it did. You did, Vincent said. And that's a debt that exists. But I'm here to talk about what's practical, not what's owed. Voss studied him. The pale eyes moved over Vincent's face with the meticulous attention of someone reading a document for hidden clauses. "Why?" Voss said finally. "Why what?" "Why dismantle it? Genuinely. You're 38 years old. You're at the height of what this life can give a man. Why now?" Vincent looked at him for a moment. "Because the height isn't what I thought it was," he said. Voss made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "A woman," he said. "Partly. The bookstore woman. I had a full profile on her within a week of you visiting the third time." Voss moved from the desk toward the window, stopping a few feet from Vincent's chair, looking down at Harbor Avenue. "She rejected you. Multiple times, from what my people observed." "Yes. And you're dismantling an empire for a woman who rejected you." "I'm dismantling an empire," Vincent said, "because it turns out I built the wrong thing. She just made that visible." Voss looked out the window for a long moment. Below them, Harbor Avenue moved in its ordinary way. Trucks, pedestrians, the small, indifferent business of a city morning. "I want the Pelham properties," Voss said. "The real estate holdings your father acquired between '94 and 2001. That's what I want in exchange for stepping back." Vincent had expected a demand. He'd expected it to be property. "Some of those properties," he said carefully, "are currently occupied by businesses I've made commitments to." "Then you have a problem to solve," Voss said. "Some of them, not all." "Which ones?" "My attorney will contact Prescott," Voss said, which meant he already knew about Prescott, which meant the morning's meeting had been observed, which meant Voss had more coverage on Vincent's movements than Solis alone could account for. "We'll work it through proper channels, legitimate transfer. And the people who were used in last night's operation. Tallow is a professional. He'll move on." "Sal Bren." Voss looked at him. "Bren is a grieving man. I pointed him at something and he moved. That's the extent of it." "He stays untouched," Vincent said. "Whatever his grievance with me, he's not your instrument anymore." A long pause. "Fine," Voss said. "And the documentation on Marco Ricci's business?" "Destroyed," Voss said. "Once the transfer is complete." Vincent stood from the chair. He was a few inches taller than Voss, and the standing equalized what the other man had tried to establish. They faced each other in the hotel room above Harbor Avenue, two men who had come from the same world by different roads and were standing at the edge of a transaction that would end something and begin something else. 24 hours, Vincent said, for the property list. 48, Voss said. "I want it complete." 48, Vincent agreed. He moved toward the door. One of Voss's men stepped slightly out of the connecting doorway, not blocking, just present. Vincent passed him without acknowledgement. At the door he stopped. "One more thing," he said without turning. "The next time you reach into my life, for any reason, through any instrument, the conversation we're not having right now will happen instead." He left the door open behind him and walked back to the elevator and rode down to the lobby and crossed Harbor Avenue to where Caruso was waiting, and Caruso looked at his face and asked nothing. They drove back toward Vance Street in silence, and Vincent watched the city through the window and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has been operating at maximum capacity for 36 consecutive hours and has just negotiated his way through the most consequential conversation of his adult life and still has one more thing to do before he sleeps. He had 48 hours to compile a property list. He had Prescott working federal channels. He had Dante in a back room and Solis in another, and an organization that was going to have to be carefully unwound in a sequence that protected the people on its edges, the families, the legitimate businesses, the men who had followed his instructions for years and whose exposure was partly his responsibility. He had all of that, and he had Margaret Hale's voice from this morning, "You cannot come back here," sitting in the center of his chest like a structural element that something else was going to have to be built around. He would not argue with her decision. She was right about the logic of it. She had been right about the logic from October. But logic, he had been discovering for 6 months, was not the only thing operating. The car stopped at a red light at the corner of Wharton and 6th, and without intending to, Vincent looked left down 6th toward Pelham, toward the corner he could see from here if the light were better, where the sign he couldn't read from this distance said "Hail" and "Bound" in gold letters that were slightly chipped on the left side of the ampersand. And he sat with the specific ache of a man who has decided to become different and is not yet different enough. Not yet. And the light changed and the car moved and he kept his eyes forward and let the corner go behind him. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. The third such number in 2 days, which meant the communication infrastructure around him was more compromised than he'd believed. He opened the message. It was not from Voss. It was a photograph. The front of Hail and Bound taken within the last hour. He could tell by the quality of the morning light. And in the doorway of the store, clearly visible, were 2 figures. Margaret. And a man Vincent had never seen before, standing close, speaking to her in what the photograph's angle made look like intimacy, and in the man's right hand, held loosely at his side, was something small and dark that was not a phone and was not a wallet, and that Vincent's eyes identified in the half-second of the photograph's examination with the cold mechanical certainty of someone who had spent his adult life in rooms where such things were present. He said one word to Casto, and Casto didn't ask what it meant. He just drove, and the city blurred past, and Vincent's hand was already on the door handle before the car had fully stopped, because the person in the photograph had not been sent by Voss. Voss had agreed. Voss had shaken the informal hand of a practical man's understanding, and that meant there was a third party, someone he had not yet identified and had not yet mapped, someone for whom the last 48 hours was not a negotiation, but a setup, and the setup was not complete. And the final piece of it was standing in the doorway of a bookstore on Pelham and 6th with a woman who did not know what the man beside her was holding. Casto had the car doing 60 on a street rated for 35, and Vincent didn't tell him to slow down. He looked at the photograph again. The man in the doorway was not large, medium height, lean, dressed in the kind of ordinary coat that was designed to not be remembered. His face was turned 3/4 away from the camera, which meant whoever had taken the photograph had been positioned across the street and slightly north, which meant this was not a candid shot, this was sent deliberately, which meant someone wanted Vincent moving fast and moving now toward Pelham and 6th without time to think about why. He made himself think about why. Voss had agreed. Voss was practical, and the agreement was in his interest, and Voss did not make agreements he intended to immediately break. That had always been true about him. It was one of the things that had made him a functional partner in the old days. So this was not Voss. Sal Bren was a grieving man with exhausted leverage and no remaining operational capacity. Not Bren. Tallow was a professional who had been paid for a job that was now concluded. Not Tallow. Which left the third party. The one he'd felt at the edges of the situation without being able to name. The one whose existence he'd registered in the hotel room when he'd understood that Solus alone hadn't provided sufficient access for everything Voss had known. There had been a second source inside his organization. He hadn't gotten to it yet because the last 36 hours had been moving too fast. The photograph was designed to keep him moving too fast. "Slow down," he told Casto. Casto eased off, looked at him in the mirror. Vincent called Caruso. "The photograph I just received," he said. "Trace the sending number and find me the origin point of the image. Where was it taken from?" "You got a photograph?" "Check your own phone," Vincent said. "Someone sent it to the whole network. They wanted everyone moving." A pause. "I don't have..." A shorter pause. "Vincent, I don't have anything from an unknown number." "Check again." "I'm looking at my phone. There's nothing." Vincent looked at his own screen. The message was there. The photograph, clear, time-stamped 11:42. He sent a screenshot to Caruso. "Got it," Caruso said. "Pulling the number now. Give me 3 minutes." Vincent sat with the phone in his hand and looked out the window at the city passing at a more measured speed and made himself hold still inside, which was the hardest thing and also the necessary thing, because the photograph had been sent only to him, not to his network, which meant this was personal. Which meant the person who sent it knew his number, which narrowed the field significantly, and it meant they wanted him alone at Pelham and 6th, which meant Pelham and 6th was where they wanted him, not where Margaret was in danger, or both. He couldn't rule out both. "Go to Pelham," he told Casto. Normal speed. Park on Wharton, not on 6th. He called Renner next. I need you at the corner of Pelham and 6th. Now. Don't go to the front of the bookstore. Go to the alley on the north side of the block and watch the back entrance. Don't engage anything. Just watch and call me. Renner said he was 7 minutes out. Vincent sat with the 7 minutes. Caruso called back in 4. The number, Caruso said, and his voice had a particular quality that Vincent had heard before, the voice of a man delivering information he'd rather not be delivering. It's registered to a burner purchased in this city 14 months ago, but the metadata on the image has a geotag. The photograph was taken from the apartment above the bookstore. Vincent was very still. Oliver's apartment, he said. That's the address, yes. Is Oliver at school? It's past noon, he should be. Find out if he went to school today, Vincent said. Right now. He got out of the car. He was on Wharton, half a block from the Pelham corner. He moved on foot, staying on Wharton, not turning onto 6th yet, keeping the storefront out of his line of sight and keeping himself out of the storefront's line of sight, moving along the building line with the particular deliberate calm that his body defaulted to when things were acute. Renner called. North Alley, nothing unusual. Back entrance to the store is closed, one window lit on the second floor. The second floor is the apartment, Vincent said. Stay on that window. Caruso called back. Oliver didn't go to school today. He called in sick this morning. The school noted it as parent excused. Margaret called the school? The school log says parent call at 8:07. 8:07. 17 minutes after Vincent had left the bookstore. Margaret would have been in the store, starting her opening. She would not have called the school at 8:07. Someone called the school pretending to be Margaret, Vincent said. Oliver is in the apartment. He turned the corner onto 6th and walked toward the bookstore at a pace that looked like nothing in particular. A man on his way somewhere, and he looked at the door of Hale and Bound and saw through the window that the store was lit and Margaret was at the counter, visible, apparently fine, and there was no man in the doorway. The doorway was empty, had been empty for however long. The photograph was old or staged, and he was meant to come to the front while something happened at the back. He walked past the front of the store without stopping and kept going to the next building and turned into the narrow service corridor that ran behind the row of storefronts, parallel to the alley where Renner was posted, and he went up the external stair that led to the building's back access and took the stairs fast and quiet and came out on the landing outside the door to the second-floor apartment. The door was not fully closed, an inch of dark gap along the frame where the latch hadn't caught. He stood outside that inch of gap and listened. Voices inside, one adult male, low and even, and one younger voice that was working very hard to sound unafraid and mostly succeeding. Oliver's voice said, "I don't know what you're talking about." The adult voice said, "You don't need to know, you just need to sit still." Vincent pushed the door open. The apartment above Hale and Bound was small and dense with the accumulated material of 2 lives lived carefully in limited space. Bookshelves on every wall, a narrow kitchen, a living area where Oliver was sitting in the wooden chair from the desk, zip ties on his wrists, his jaw tight, and his eyes furious in the way Vincent had come to recognize as his particular form of fear, and across from him a man Vincent knew. The man's name was Croft. He was 37 years old, and he had worked for the Moretti organization for 9 years in a mid-level logistics capacity, and Vincent had reassigned him 8 months ago during a restructuring that had reduced his role and his income. And the reassignment had generated a grievance that had apparently been growing since, and Croft had taken that grievance to someone, not Voss, not Bren, but to a contact in a competing network who had decided that a man with access and a grudge was worth cultivating. Vincent understood all of this in the second it took to push the door open and register the room. Croft turned. He had the dark object that the photograph had shown. A compact, nothing unusual, the kind of thing that men in this world kept without it, meaning anything specific until it meant everything specific. He'd been pointing it at the floor near Oliver's feet. Now it came up. "Close the door," Croft said. Vincent closed the door behind him. "Put your hands where I can see them," Croft said. Vincent put his hands up, open, visible. He was not going to reach for the weapon he carried because the geometry of the room was wrong, and Oliver was directly between Croft's current position and the wall, and there was no angle that was acceptable. "Croft," he said. "Don't," Croft said. "Don't do the name thing. Don't do the calm voice. I've watched you do it for 9 years. I know what it is." "All right," Vincent said. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Call off the restructure," Croft said. "I know what you're doing. Prescott, the federal conversations, word got out in 4 hours. You're burning everything down and walking away and leaving everyone who built it with you holding whatever's left." "That's not—" "It is exactly what it is," Croft said, and his voice had the particular flat quality of someone who has been composing this conversation in his head for months and has moved past the emotional version of it into something colder. "You built this thing, and now you've found a reason to be done with it, and you're going to walk out clean, and everyone else gets the exposure." "The restructure protects—" "It protects you," Croft said. "Legal insulation. That's what Prescott does. You get the insulation. What do I get? What does anyone under you get?" Vincent looked at him. The weapon was steady, which meant Croft was past the shaking stage of whatever this was and into the settled stage, which was in some ways more dangerous and in some ways less. "What do you want?" Vincent said. "I want guarantees, written, that the people who built this organization are covered, that the restructure includes protection for everyone in the operational chain, not just the top." "I can do that," Vincent said. "I know you can. I want to know that you will." "You have my word." "Your word," Croft said, with a specific tonelessness that communicated exactly what he thought about that. "Yes," Vincent said. "My word, which in 9 years of working together has meant something." A silence. Oliver was very still in the chair. His eyes were on Vincent with an expression that was not a child's expression. It was the expression of someone doing rapid and pragmatic assessment of a bad situation, which was the expression of a boy who had learned young that bad situations were the kind you had to think through rather than panic through. "My word," Vincent said again, "and Prescott in a room within 24 hours. Whatever you need documented, we document, but you need to let the boy go right now. He has nothing to do with any of this." "He has everything to do with it," Croft said. "He's the reason you're dismantling this in the first place. The whole organization knows it. The whole organization knows you're torching everything because of a woman who won't even— Croft, have you? You're burning it for someone who told you no." The room was very quiet. "Yes," Vincent said. "That's approximately right." The flatness of the admission seemed to do something to Croft's architecture. It wasn't the response he'd been built for, and the absence of deflection or justification left him briefly without a next move. Vincent used the brief. Not fast, not dramatic. He simply stepped to the left and slightly forward, changing his position relative to Oliver, and he kept his hands visible and his voice even as he did it, saying, "I'm going to cut the zip ties. I'm going to do it slowly. You can watch every movement." And he produced the small folding knife from his coat pocket with 2 fingers, blade end down, not threatening, and he looked at Croft and waited. Croft's eyes moved between the knife and Vincent's face. "Back up when you do it," Croft said. "I'll do it from the side," Vincent said. "Oliver, turn the chair 45 degrees toward me." Oliver turned the chair, awkward with his hands bound, the legs scraping on the floor. Vincent moved to his side, not between Oliver and Croft, keeping the angle clean, and he cut the zip ties in 2 quick movements and stepped back immediately. The knife folded and returned to his pocket in a single motion. Oliver stood. He stood up straight, which cost him something. Vincent could see it in the set of his jaw. And he moved to the left wall and put his back against it. "Now," Croft said. "Now," Vincent agreed. "Prescott, 24 hours. You put the weapon down and we walk out of here, and by this time tomorrow you have something in writing that covers you and everyone you're thinking about. That's the offer. And if I say no, then we're in this room a lot longer and nothing improves." Croft looked at him. The steady look of a man who had gotten this far on nerve and grievance and was now running the calculation on what came next with the honesty of someone who knows when a position is tenuous. He put the weapon down on the kitchen counter behind him. Vincent exhaled through his nose. Not visibly. Just internally, the long, slow release of something that had been held at maximum compression for approximately 4 minutes. He took his phone out and called Renner. "Come up the back," he said. "Doors open." Croft left with Renner, not under arrest. There was no legal structure for what had just happened that didn't implicate everyone, but under the clear understanding that the meeting with Prescott was real, and the documentation was real, and the protections were real, and that the alternative to believing that was a set of options nobody in the room wanted to enumerate. When they were gone, Vincent stood in the small apartment above the bookstore with Oliver and the quiet that followed acute things. Oliver sat back down in the chair, not because anyone told him to, just because his legs had apparently finished their job and were ready to be done for a moment. "Second time in 2 days," Oliver said. "Yes," Vincent said. "Is there going to be a third time?" "No," Vincent said. Oliver looked at him with the eyes that were his mother's eyes and said, "How do you know?" "Because the people who had reason to do this have all been accounted for now," Vincent said, "and because what I'm doing going forward doesn't give them the same leverage." "What are you doing going forward?" "Ending the thing that made you a useful target," Vincent said. "That's the short version." Oliver was quiet. He looked at his wrists where the plastic had left red marks. He rubbed one with the opposite thumb. "She told you not to come back," Oliver said. "She did. Are you going to?" Vincent looked at the boy for a long moment. "That's her decision," he said. Oliver looked back at him with the measuring stare he'd been deploying since September, the one that cataloged and weighed and didn't issue a verdict until it was ready. "She cried last night," Oliver said, "after I was asleep. I heard her." He paused. "She doesn't cry. She didn't cry when my mom died, not that I saw. She holds things." Another pause. "She was crying last night, and then she stopped and I heard her moving around the store for a long time. Like 2 in the morning, she was still moving around." Vincent said nothing. "I'm just telling you," Oliver said. "I'm not telling you what to do about it." "I know," Vincent said. He went downstairs and found Margaret. She was behind the counter. The store had 2 customers in it, and she was helping one of them with something in the fiction section. And when Vincent came through the front door, she looked up and saw his face and excused herself from the customer and walked to the back room, and he followed her. She turned around when she heard the door close. "Oliver," she said immediately. "He's fine. He's upstairs. He wasn't hurt." The structured control in her face released slightly, a millimeter, which for Margaret was significant. "Third time," she said. "Last time," he said. "I promise you that. Last time." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were at her sides and she was doing the thing she did. The full present attention, the reading of what was actually there rather than what was presented. "You look terrible," she said. "I haven't slept." "Sit down," she said. He sat. She made coffee. The automatic competent movements of someone who makes coffee the way other people breathe. And she set a cup in front of him and sat across the small table. "Tell me what happened this morning," she said. "All of it." He told her. He told her about Voss and the hotel room and the 48-hour agreement. He told her about Croft and the apartment upstairs, and the zip ties and the way Oliver had sat straight when he stood. He told her about Prescott and what was being built in the legal infrastructure. She listened without interrupting. This was one of her great capacities. She did not fill silence with her own voice while another person was using theirs. When he finished, she held her coffee cup in both hands and looked at the table. "How long?" she said. "Before it's done. Before the organization is... Before there's nothing left of it. A year, possibly less. Prescott thinks 8 months if the federal cooperation moves cleanly. And in those 8 months, I'll be careful," he said. "More careful than I've been. And the people who had leverage over me through you, through Oliver, they're gone. Voss is gone. Croft is going to be managed." He paused. "I should have been more careful from the beginning. I wasn't because I told myself I could manage the separation. I was wrong about that." She nodded, not accepting an apology, processing a fact. "This morning," she said, "I told you not to come back." "I know. I meant it when I said it." I know that too. I meant it, she said again and then stopped. She set down her coffee. She pressed her lips together and looked at the wall beside him rather than at him for a moment. I meant it because it was the correct thing to say, and because the reasoning was sound, and because every practical consideration pointed to it. She looked back at him. I also cried for 2 hours last night after I said it, which I'm telling you not because I want you to feel that you've won something, but because I think you should know the full truth of the situation. Oliver told me, Vincent said, that you were up late. Something moved through her face. Not irritation, just the faint exasperation of a woman whose grandson had apparently decided to participate in things. He's going to be a problem, she said. He's going to be extraordinary, Vincent said. She looked at him. He sat straight, Vincent said, in that chair, with his hands tied and a man with a weapon in the room. He sat straight, and he assessed the situation, and he waited for the right moment. That's not something you teach. That's something a person is. She was quiet for a moment. His mother was like that, she said softly. She was like that from the time she was small. She stopped, started again. I think about her every day. I think about what she would say about all of this. About you, specifically. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. She would have liked you. She liked difficult people. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. They sat with the observation for a moment. I'm not asking you to decide anything today, Vincent said. I know what you said this morning, and I'm not asking you to revise it under duress. What I'm asking is for you to know that what I'm doing, Waltroy, the dismantling, the restructure, the federal cooperation, I was moving toward it already. Last night didn't create it. Last night just removed the last reason I had to move slowly. What was the last reason? She said. He looked at her. If I was still running the organization, there was an argument that I could control the danger around you, that having me connected was better than having me absent. Last night proved that argument was wrong. She absorbed this. So you're dismantling it, she said. Not for me. For a lot of reasons, he said. You're one of them. Oliver is one. The people who are going to get hurt if it keeps running the way it's been running, they're also reasons. That's a more complicated answer than I expected. You asked an honest question, he said. I'm giving you an honest answer. She looked at him for a long time. The back room of Hale and Bound was very quiet. From the front of the store came the muffled sound of the other customer moving among the shelves. You said you wouldn't ask, she said. I'm not asking, he said. I'm sitting here. There's a difference. The corner of her mouth moved again, slightly more this time. There is a difference, she said. She picked up her coffee and drank from it and set it down. Come back in a week, she said. Not tomorrow. A week. All right, he said. Oliver will want to see you. He won't say that, but he will. I know, he said. He stood. He put on his coat. He looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her in this room for months. The full attendance of it, not managing it, not measuring it, just looking at the specific woman who had somehow become the axis of a set of decisions that were going to cost him a great deal and were still, when he was honest with himself, worth exactly what they cost. Margaret, he said. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for the coffee and for the rest of it. She held his gaze. Go get some sleep, she said. He slept for 11 hours. He woke in the early dark and lay in the ceiling's quiet and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific texture of a life that was heading somewhere rather than simply running. The months that followed were not easy and were not quick. Prescott worked the federal channels with the careful precision of someone diffusing something, and the cooperation took shape over 6 months of meetings and document production and the particular tedium of legal processes that moved at their own pace regardless of urgency. The organization came apart piece by piece, some of it in ways that were clean, some in ways that required navigation Vincent didn't enjoy, and handled anyway because the alternative was leaving exposure for people who hadn't chosen it. Dante Ricci's situation resolved in a way that was neither justice nor its absence, but something more human than either. Vincent arranged the neutralization of Voss's documentation on Marco Ricci through Prescott's office, and Dante spent 4 months in a state of uncertain waiting before Vincent told him, briefly and without warmth, that the documentation was gone and Marco was covered, and that the debt between them was not cleared but was being carried forward into whatever came next, which was the most accurate accounting of complicated things. Dante didn't ask for more than that. He didn't deserve to. Croft got his documentation. Everyone in the operational chain got something, not immunity, not complete protection, but the kind of structured transition that left them with options rather than exposure. It cost Vincent money and time and several conversations with federal contacts that he didn't enjoy, and it was the right thing to do, and he did it. Voss took the properties he'd demanded, processed through legitimate transfer as agreed, and returned to Portugal, and the understanding between them held, which Vincent had expected because practical men kept practical agreements. He didn't expect to hear from Voss again, and he didn't. Sal Bren, the grieving brother with the exhausted leverage, moved to another city the following spring. Vincent arranged, through 3 layers of separation, for a small amount of money to find its way to a grief counseling organization that Bren's sister-in-law ran. He didn't tell anyone he did it. He didn't want credit for it. He just did it because the man had lost his brother, and the loss was real, even if everything else about the situation wasn't. The bookstore changed over time, but slowly, in the way of things built on real foundations. The community center came later, a year after, in the space of 2 adjacent storefronts that Vincent purchased legitimately and renovated with a contractor who asked no unusual questions, and which opened on a Thursday morning with folding chairs and bad coffee, and 14 people who showed up because Margaret had mentioned it to them over the previous 6 months. It grew the way things grow when they answer an actual need. By the following spring, there were programs for young people 3 afternoons a week, and a job skills workshop on Saturdays, and a tutoring arrangement with the school 2 blocks over. Oliver volunteered there. He didn't announce this or make it a declaration. He just started showing up on Tuesday afternoons with his backpack and his skeptical eyes and his unexpectedly patient manner with children younger than himself. And then he kept showing up. Vincent did not run the center. He funded portions of it and showed up when it was useful and otherwise stayed out of the way, because Margaret ran it and she ran it without needing him to run it alongside her. And understanding the difference between contributing to something and needing to control it was one of the things that changed in him over the year of unwinding. He thought about that sometimes, what it was that changed and what it was that had needed to change. He didn't arrive at clean answers. He'd been a particular kind of man for a long time, and becoming a different kind required the kind of sustained, unglamorous effort that didn't look like transformation from the inside. From the inside, it mostly looked like showing up and doing the next right thing, and not reverting when the next right thing was inconvenient, which it frequently was. He came back to the bookstore at the end of the week, as she'd said, and the week after. And the week after that, and the weeks became months, and the thing between them settled into something that had no clean label and didn't need one. It was not easy. She was not easy. She was exacting and private and carried things quietly that she wouldn't always let him help with. And he was not naturally suited to being questioned, which she did regularly and without apology, about his decisions and his reasoning and whether what he was doing matched what he'd said he would do. They disagreed about things. They disagreed about Oliver's curfew and about the pace of the community center expansion and about whether Vincent needed to be as careful as he was being with the people he'd cut ties with. She thought he was too lenient. He thought she was occasionally too absolute. They said these things to each other directly, and then the conversations continued. He had never been in anything that worked the way this worked. And the way it worked was imperfectly, consistently, and with both of them choosing it repeatedly in the absence of any necessity to do so. She said yes to his proposal on a Wednesday afternoon in the back room of Hale and Bound, 3 days before the community center's first anniversary. She said it without ceremony, looking up from the ledger she was balancing, if she'd decided in the middle of a number and saw no reason to wait until the number was finished. He said, "You're sure?" She said, "I've been sure for a while. I was waiting until I believed you were who you were trying to become. Not who you said you were, who you were actually becoming." And she looked at him over her reading glasses. "You're close enough," she said. "The rest we'll work on." Oliver was 17 by then, 3 inches taller than he'd been the day Vincent had found him in a cold storage room on a pier, and he had his mother's eyes still and his grandmother's particular directness, and something that was entirely his own, which was a kind of bone-deep toughness that didn't perform itself, that just sat in him quietly and was there when it was needed. He was the one who found them in the back room after Margaret said yes. He came in to ask about something for the center and read the room in about a second and a half and said, with the straight face of a boy who was very nearly a man, "Finally!" "Go finish your homework," Margaret said. "It's done," Oliver said. And he looked at Vincent with the cataloging stare that had been gathering its verdict since the first time they'd been in the same room, since the orange cat had looked at Vincent from the display table and looked away, since the first cup of coffee and the first book and the first truth that had been said in this back room between people learning whether they could afford to trust each other. The verdict apparently was in. Oliver went back to the front of the store. They could hear him moving among the shelves, straightening things that didn't need straightening, occupying himself with the sounds of the life that surrounded them, the creak of the old floors, the bell above the door as a customer came in, the particular quality of silence that is not actually silence but is the accumulated presence of a place that has been inhabited with care. Margaret turned back to her ledger. She found her place in the column of numbers. She picked up her pen. Vincent sat across from her in the back room of the bookstore that smelled of old paper and coffee and faint lavender, in the city that moved outside the window without knowing or caring about the things that had been decided within these walls. And he looked at this woman, silver-haired, reading-glassed, straight-backed, doing her accounting with the unhurried precision of someone entirely at home in her own life. And he felt something that he had no adequate language for and didn't attempt to translate, because some things are diminished by the effort of naming them. He picked up the book he'd left there 2 days ago. He found his page. Outside, the neighborhood continued in its ordinary way. The community center 2 doors down had its lights on. A boy on a bicycle moved past the window. Somewhere down the block, the new bakery was doing its end-of-day business, and the smell of it reached even here, warm in particular, the smell of ordinary things done well. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Neither of them needed to. The past was what it was. All of it. The warehouse, and the hotel room, and the February love letters in the window, and the 3 rejections, and the rent that had quietly dropped, and the night Margaret had cried for 2 hours while moving through her store at 2 in the morning, and the cold storage room, and the things said and unsaid across this small table across all the months that had led to this one. It was all still there. It didn't go anywhere. It just became the ground beneath something rather than the weight on top of it, and that was the only kind of peace that was real, because it cost what it cost, and it held what it held, and it was built, in the end, out of the only materials either of them had ever had, the imperfect ones, the ones that turned out, with enough time and enough honesty and enough stubborn, unglamorous showing up, to be exactly enough.